crop enhancement and crop genomics research, and Monsanto Cirrus research collaboration lead. Thank you for being here, sir. Next, Mr. Bill Fries. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Fries.
Fries.
Yeah.
Mr. Bill Fries is Science Policy Analyst with the Center for Food Safety, a DC-based nonprofit group. Mr. Fries has written and lectured extensively on the science, regulation, and societal implications of agricultural biotechnology for over a decade. In 2004, he co-authored a peer-reviewed scientific paper on common myths about U.S. regulation of genetically engineered crops. Mr. Fries is a frequently quoted expert in agricultural biotechnology in mainstream media, as well as the scientific press. He's reviewed and critiqued numerous petitions for deregulation of herbicide-resistant crops, the subject of today's hearing. And finally, Mr. Jay Vroom, is that correct? Yes. Mr. Vroom is President and Chief Executive Officer of Crop Life America, the largest national trade organization representing developers, manufacturers, formulators, and distributors of agricultural pesticides across the United States. Mr. Vroom has held this position since 1989. Previously, Mr. Vroom served as Executive Vice President and Chief Executive Officer of National Fertilizer Solutions Association in St. Louis, Missouri. He began his professional career on the staff of the Fertilizer Institute. As with the previous panel, I just want to make you aware that it is the policy of the Committee of Oversight and Government Reform to swear in all witnesses before they testify. I would ask that you gentlemen rise, raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. Let the record reflect that each of the witnesses has answered in the affirmative. I would now ask that each witness give an oral summary of your testimony. I would ask that you keep the summary under 5 minutes and remind you that your entire written statement will be included in the record of the hearing and will be distributed to the members of this committee as well as to the media. We're going to begin with Mr. Smith. You're the first witness. I would ask that you proceed.
Thank you, Chairman Kucinich, and members of all the Domestic Policy Subcommittee, for the opportunity to present to you some important concerns about the pending release of dicamba-resistant soybeans. My name is Steve Smith, Director of Agriculture for Red Gold, the largest privately held canned tomato processor in the United States. Red Gold is based in Indiana and has 3 processing facilities. Our tomatoes are grown by 54 family farming operations throughout Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. Our concerns about the upcoming increased use of dicamba are not just about tomatoes, but all fruit and vegetable crops and rural homeowners living near local farms. The use of dicamba is not new. It's effective, it's a great weed killer, and it's economical to apply. So many may be wondering why a product that is effective, proven, and economical is not the #1 herbicide in use today. The answer is simple. Dicamba has also proven itself to move off target and injure adjoining crops, so it is not currently widely used. New technology is good and needs to be pursued, but must be examined for unintended consequences. At one time, the conventional wisdom thought it was a good idea to use lead in paint. The theory of dicamba-tolerant soybeans might appear sound on the surface. The ability to kill weeds is proven, but the potential damage to other sectors of agriculture and rural homeowners demands that we take a closer look at this particular advance. When put in the spotlight, the answer will become abundantly clear. The widespread use of dicamba is incompatible with Midwestern agriculture. Dicamba is highly vulnerable to off-site movement in 3 forms: direct drift, volatilization, and spray tank contamination.
What was that? Direct drift? What else?
Volatilization.
Okay.
And spray tank contamination. You would think the risk of direct drift could be completely controlled by good management practices, such as spraying in little or no wind, or when the wind was blowing away from a sensitive crop, such as tomatoes. But unfortunately, that's just not always the case. Red Gold has suffered over $1 million in drift claims over the last 4 years.
A reduced application window has forced otherwise good farmers to spray on windy days when they know they shouldn't. But I want to focus on volatilization because it's the real issue that makes dicamba a danger to Midwestern agriculture. Volatilization occurs when the active ingredient evaporates and then can be moved with the surrounding air mass for up to 4 days after application, and its killing capabilities can spread up to 2 miles or more in certain geographic areas such as in a valley. Even the best farmer, the most conscientious farmers, can't control or predict what will happen for up to 4 days after application. Ironically, the very conditions that minimize direct drift actually maximize volatilization: little or no wind, high temperatures, and high humidity, normal conditions for when this product is applied in June and July. A good neighbor that wakens early in the morning to spray before the winds pick up would be at the highest risk of causing volatilization injury. In other testimony offered, you may hear that new formulations of dicamba will reduce the risk of volatilization. We believe those claims to be overly optimistic, as even the newest formulations are still proven to move off target. It simply is impossible to control or predict its movement. The science is clear and settled in regard to dicamba's susceptibility to off-target movement due to volatility. If, as you might hear from others, the risk of off-target movement of dicamba due to volatilization are low and can be controlled through improved product stewardship and formulations, it only makes sense that those who will profit from the sale of this seed technology and the makers of dicamba should willingly step up to the plate and establish an indemnity fund to cover crop losses and homeowners' claims for damages. If they are unwilling to cover potential losses, is this an admission that the safety of this technology is not as safe as we've been led to believe? The Midwest is the home to a unique system of family farms that are known as the breadbasket of the world. The introduction of dicamba-tolerant soybeans is a classic case of short-sighted enthusiasm over a new technology, putting this region at unneeded risk and blinding us to the reality of damage that is sure to come. Even the best, the most conscientious farmers cannot control where this weed killer will end up. Increased dicamba usage made possible through the introduction of dicamba-tolerant soybeans is poor public policy and should not be allowed. Thank you for the opportunity to present my concerns to you today. I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have concerning this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Miller, please proceed.
Chairman Kucinich and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify on matters relating to modern agricultural technology. I work at Monsanto, whose only focus is agriculture. I spent much of my youth in a small agricultural community in Lawrence County, Illinois, where I had the privilege of helping my grandfather on his farm. I also have a farm in Nebraska. Through my experiences, I have a great appreciation for what the American farmer has and can achieve with the right tools and a willingness to adopt new technologies and practices. I currently serve as Vice President of Regulatory with more than 500 scientists in my organization, and it is responsible for the global product approval and stewardship. The topic of today's hearing is an important one. World population is growing. In the next 40 years or so, there will be 9 billion people on our planet. That's 3 billion more people that will show up to the dinner table, and many will want to use the foods that we've grown up with. To put it in context, that's the equivalent of 3 more Chinas. The challenge is, how do we do it using fewer resources? Farmers are increasingly being asked to produce more with less, and helping them do this is what Monsanto is all about. Our company has a commitment to sustainable agriculture. We will do our part to help farmers double yield in the core crops of corn, cotton, and soybeans between 2000 and 2030, while producing each bushel or bale with 1/3 fewer resources. And just as important, in doing so, we will help farmers earn more, improve the lives of their families, and rural communities globally. Agricultural innovation has provided farmers with improved agronomic practices, advances in breeding, and novel traits through modern biotechnology, which increases yield and profits. In 1996, the Roundup Ready system was first introduced into soybeans. The Roundup Ready system was attracted to farmers because it offered superior crop safety and the use of familiar and proven herbicide that controls more than 300 weeds. In Roundup Ready soybeans, glyphosate sprayed after the crop's weeds emerge provide a level of weed control and ease of safe use that surpasses other options. Importantly, in addition to the benefits provided in weed control, the Roundup Ready system has made the adoption of conservation tillage practices feasible. Conservation tillage contributes to the long-term sustainability of farming practices. Before the Roundup Ready system was introduced, the environmental benefits of conservation tillage were documented, but adoption by growers had been limited. The broad enrollment in conservation tillage due to the Roundup Ready system has led to the reduction in extent of plowing and tillage, which has significantly reduced the loss of topsoil due to erosion, improved soil structure, reduced runoff of sediment and fertilizer, reduced on-farm fuel use, reduced CO2 emissions, and increased carbon sequestration in the soil. Controlling weeds is paramount in maintaining and improving crop productivity. Unlike insects and diseases which occur in some years and not others, weeds occur in crops every year. Experts recommend using multiple herbicides to provide more than one mechanism of action. Upon applying multiple mechanisms of action, reduces the likelihood of a resistant weed population developing because there is a low probability that a particular weed within a population would have resistance to both mechanisms of action. In addition, farmers may choose to use mechanical or cultural techniques in addition to or in place of herbicides. The specific program employed will depend on the farmer's choice of the best management practices on his or her farm. Monsanto has shared interest with farmers in effective weed management. The proactive adoption of best management practices based on the principle of diversity in weed management will improve weed control, help ensure that conservation tillage systems are sustainable, and that the yield, economic, and environmental benefits are fully realized. As I stated at the beginning of my remarks, Monsanto's only focus is agriculture. If farmers don't succeed, Monsanto doesn't succeed. That is why as we bring new technology to the market, we value growers' input, such as Mr. Smith, who's here today, who we invited and has become a member of our dicamba advisory council. We are committed to invest and develop seed and trait systems to provide farmers with effective, affordable, convenient, and sustainable agricultural solutions, including weed control. Thank you, Chairman, for your time and attention today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Fries.
Yes, Chairman Kucinich, members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me here today to testify. I would just like to preface my remarks real quickly to respond to something Ms. Wright and Mr. Miller just said about world hunger and productivity. Actually, the subject here, Roundup Ready crops, do not have higher yields. That's a myth. It's basically designed to save time and save labor and help farmers get bigger. Also, there's an increase in pesticide use with these crops, actually quite substantial, not a decrease. And the conservation tillage benefits that Mr. Miller mentioned, well, conservation tillage was mostly adopted before the introduction of these Roundup Ready crops. Just as Roundup Ready crops were being introduced in 1997, Monsanto scientists published a paper in which they presented all the reasons weeds were not likely to evolve resistance to glyphosate. Well, it wasn't the first time they'd been wrong, and of course they turned out to be disastrously wrong. As discussed in part one of this hearing in July, unregulated use of these crop systems has triggered an epidemic of glyphosate-resistant weeds, and it's fostered sharp increases in herbicide use, greater use of soil-eroding tillage operations, and is substantially raising weed control costs for ever more growers. Now, Monsanto and other pesticide firms assure us that multiple herbicide-resistant weeds are the solution to glyphosate-resistant weeds. DuPont, for instance, even envisions a single crop resistant to 7 or more different classes of herbicides. And there are hundreds of millions of dollars being invested, resistance genes to just about every herbicide imaginable, including paraquat, for instance. And about half of the GE crops pending deregulation at USDA right now are herbicide resistant. We shouldn't let ourselves be misled again. These new herbicide-resistant crops are the wrong response to glyphosate-resistant weeds. And just very briefly, I could go into detail in questions if you like, but one reason is that they simply won't work. At best, we'll get a short-term reprieve until nature cleverly evolves resistance to the new and multiple herbicides deployed against them. Second, farmers will pay in multiple ways, through increasingly expensive biotech seeds and the multiple herbicide cocktails that come with them, and through crop damage, as Steve mentioned, or through purchasing the HR seed in order to defend oneself against drift. Third, both public health and the environment will suffer from the substantially increased use of toxic herbicides like 2,4-D and dicamba. And finally, this new wave of crops diverts attention from truly sustainable weed control practices that I'd like to get to in a moment. I think it's very clear that the glyphosate-resistant weed epidemic is a symptom of regulatory breakdown. We have a USDA which regulates an herbicide-resistant crop and the EPA, the herbicide, but no one regulates the combination, the herbicide-resistant crop herbicide system. And it is this system, the continual use of an herbicide, glyphosate, on Roundup Ready crops that is responsible for the growing epidemic of resistant weeds. This system has been presented to farmers as self-contained, two-component, seed and Roundup, and that's the way it's been used. I'm tired of people blaming farmers for this. When a federal district court judge reversed APHIS's deregulation of Roundup Ready alfalfa, he underscored APHIS's failure to examine glyphosate use. APHIS now gives purely pro forma attention to herbicide use in their regulatory reviews, and even this minimal treatment is grossly inadequate. APHIS, for instance, dismissed analysis of herbicide use with Roundup Ready crops in the Roundup Ready draft environmental impact statement that relied on gold standard data from its sister agency, the National Agricultural Statistics Service. And in its place, it used bogus data from simulation studies conducted by pesticide industry-funded groups, like the National Center for Food and Agriculture Policy and PG Economics. In other cases, USDA cited completely irrelevant data that was 10 years old or more, no relevance. APHIS also ignored research by scientists from USDA's Agricultural Research Service and others that point to a potentially increased disease susceptibility in Roundup-treated Roundup Ready crops. And unfortunately, USDA does not require testing of Roundup Ready crops to which Roundup has been applied, which is, of course, the invariable practice of farmers. In view of the growing evidence of possible disease susceptibility issues, that's inexcusable. I would just like to say USDA should definitely follow the lead of the EPA. The successful insect-resistant management program could be followed by USDA. I don't buy Ms. Wright's protestations that USDA doesn't have authority. The noxious weed provisions of the Plant Protection Act clearly give them authority to regulate practices that foster noxious weeds, and that's exactly what these systems are, these Roundup Ready systems.
I thank the gentleman for his testimony. As I said, your entire testimony will be included in the record of this hearing, and I'm sure that we're going to get back to you with some questions. Thank you very much. Mr. Vroom.
Thank you, Chairman Kucinich and Congresswoman Watson for allowing me to come and provide testimony today on behalf of the crop protection industry and CropLife America. Thank you for introducing me earlier. In addition to my role as CEO of our trade association, I also have an Illinois farm background and happen to still own the family farms that I was reared on.
I happen to have been in Illinois twice in the last 6 weeks, and 6 weeks ago stopped to take a look at one of the fields that is now being operated by my cousin that's planted this year in Roundup Ready soybeans. It was planted as a no-till crop, and Mr. Chairman, I'd love to share this photograph. There are 3 of them here with you, but I'm most proud of this particular view because it shows this field in the direction in which a terrace that my father installed as a charter member of our Bureau County, Illinois Soil and Water Conservation District, one of the first terraces installed in our county to provide then the cutting edge technology for soil conservation at that time. I remember as a youth hand weeding and hand cultivating with mechanical means fields of soybeans and other crops on this very field, and we were not able to control the soil erosion as we can today with the Roundup Ready technology. So if I could pass this up and maybe ask your staff to share that with you, I would enjoy that opportunity.
We'll include it in the record.
Thank you.
Sorted.
So conservation tillage is an important component of the introduction of biotechnology. I also have a report by our Crop Protection Research Institute that illustrates on page 2 a graph of the introduction of modern biotechnology and then the takeoff of the adoption of conservation tillage in this country, and it has made a meaningful difference, and I believe that there are clear USDA statistics to that effect. And
Would you like to submit that to the record?
If you would include that.
It'll be in the record of the hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So by my experience, and I just talked to my cousin who was combining soybeans this morning, he assured me that he is aware of weed resistance. He's taken steps to manage it on this particular field in the photographs that I will share with you. And we know that we don't have the most severe weed resistance problems with regard to glyphosate situations as are apparent in some of those 11 million acres that you refer to. Our industry, along with USDA, and unfortunately Ms. Wright probably didn't have adequate time or background to explain to you the full resources the USDA brings to bear with regard to helping farmers manage weed resistance in both biotechnology crops and elsewhere. Extension, our industry scientists, crop consultants that are private individuals, crop input retailers, all have a stake in all of this, and we have a marvelous system to help farmers manage these issues. But we do appreciate the fact that you have an interest in examining the regulatory authority of the agencies that are charged with overseeing these technologies, and we look forward to working with you as you give consideration to ways to have oversight and consideration of these matters. Lastly, I would just tell you that our industry has formed a Herbicide Resistance Action Committee that is a global entity that CropLife and our partner associations around the world are involved with, and it provides a mechanism for the common research that herbicide companies engage in with regard to helping to stay ahead of the curve and ensure that we can manage herbicide resistance in both biotechnology enhanced crops and conventional crops as well. So we believe that we do have a system in place that allows us to continue to manage these issues. We understand the particular media attention that's been given to herbicide resistance in biotechnology crops, but we believe that we have an adequate system and appreciate the attention that you will continue to provide to this issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vroom, and I just want to assure you that we have provided Ms. Wright with as much time as she needs to be able to answer this committee's questions, and we will continue to do that. Thank you very much. Okay, let's go to questions of this second panel. Mr. Miller, with Monsanto's 100% focus, as you've said, on agriculture, I'm wondering who is responsible for the proliferation of weeds and weed species that have become Roundup resistant since the introduction of Roundup Ready crop systems?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I mentioned earlier, if our farmers aren't successful, we're not successful, and we take this matter very seriously. I would say herbicide-tolerant weeds is not a new thing. It's something we've had to manage in the industry, as well with university weed scientists and farmers in how they run their operations on their farm. So we invest a lot in the science of weed resistance and understanding that and providing technical solutions to growers along with others. And that's really our focus.
You know, I don't know if you've testified before congressional committee, and all committees are different.
No, sir.
I'm the kind of chairman that when I ask a question, I like to get a direct answer. Would you tell me who's responsible for the proliferation of weeds and weed species that have become Roundup resistant since the introduction of Roundup Ready crop systems?
I think weeds that are resistant to glyphosate are a responsibility of industry, government, weed sciences, as well as farmers to properly steward these products.
So in other words, industry, you're part of the industry, there's responsibility with Monsanto. The USDA is part of that system. There's a responsibility there. There's a whole feedback loop here, you're saying, right?
Yeah, I think there's a feedback loop, but I would say this is a herbicide issue, and I believe herbicides are regulated under the Environmental Protection Agency.
So it's encouraging that you've stated that industry has responsibility here, but you also stated that government has responsibility here as a regulatory authority, did you not?
Chairman, I believe that our regulatory agencies have clear responsibilities to demonstrate and improve the safety and use of these products.
Okay. That's you know, well, let me direct, thank you. Let me direct your attention to this ad circulated before 2005. And if, I don't know, okay, good, you're blowing it up a little bit. In the future, what I'd like to have is staff would prepare these things for witnesses to distribute them. But let me tell you what this is about. This is Monsanto, Mr. Miller, in this ad, telling farmers to use more and more Roundup and to use it exclusively to control weeds. That was just 5 years ago. And it was also 5 years after Roundup resistant horseweed was discovered in Roundup Ready crop fields in Delaware. So, Mr. Miller, help us out here. Isn't it true that if farmers followed Monsanto's advice conveyed in this ad, that they would have Roundup resistant weeds in their fields today?
Mr. Chairman, weed resistance is caused by many factors. So prior to 2005, in many systems that we developed and co-developed with the University Weed Science academics and the Weed Science Society of America. By the way, I believe one of those academics was actually referenced in that ad, just reflecting on the picture that I saw. The recommendation was that glyphosate had a low probability of developing resistance, and our recommendation was to utilize that in the system. But in cases where we have begun to discover that there are resistant weeds, we've done a lot of training, education with growers, retailers, others in the industry to recommend multiple modes of action into our cropping systems.
Well, you know, this, I'm gonna ask staff, give a copy of this to, did you give a copy, have you read this? Just look at it, because here's, you know, I'm not trying to trap you here, because I believe in having a conversation. it says no benefit in rotating glyphosate. No benefit. Could you explain that to me in light of what you said a moment ago? Take your time. If you need a moment, you have it. We're not in any hurry here. When you're ready to answer, you need a minute or two, you can answer. And if you want to rephrase anything for the record, you can do that too.
Actually, I would like to read the recommendation as stated by Monsanto in this particular article. In many Midwest cropping systems, agronomic conditions and cultural practice are conducive to pre-emergent applications, an herbicide that is not glyphosate, so one mode of action, followed by Roundup agriculture herbicides or a tank mix of residual, two different modes of action, agricultural herbicide before weeds exceed 4 inches. So this particular argument actually does steward two growers, and I'm responding to the title. No benefit from rotating glyphosate was the fact that use multiple modes of action in your system, and if you use a Roundup Ready crop in the same field the next year, and you steward it properly by using multiple modes of action, there's no need to change your overall cropping system. Okay,
now, here's, I mean, this is your ad. Now, it says, as you just said, no benefit in rotating glyphosate. Now, I showed the same ad and asked the same question to a prominent weed scientist who testified at our previous hearing. I'm sure that somebody in your organization read that testimony. He was the author of the weed chapter of the National Research Council's report published in April. Do you want to guess what his response was to the question of whether farmers would have Roundup-resistant weeds in their fields today if they followed the advice was conveyed in Monsanto's ads? What do you think his answer was?
Chairman Kucinich, I wouldn't want to speculate on that.
Okay, it's fine. I think it'd be good to read his just recommended reading to you, and his answer was yes. So, Mr. Miller, why was the discovery of Roundup-resistant horseweed as early as the year 2000 not sufficient evidence of Roundup resistance in weeds to move Monsanto to change its advice to farmers?
Congressman, first of all, I'll go back to if our growers aren't successful, we're not successful. So as we actually had the evidence of the first resistant weeds, we actually enabled university research, our own research, to understand the mechanism of that resistance. The second thing that we did was enlisted those regional university extension agents to help us develop what the recommendation for the grower was in order to keep their farming operation successful. And then once we had that identified, we actually went out and do significant training with producers, often recommending our competitors' product as part of the solution to ensure that farmer has a weed-free field.
Let me just share something with you. About 5 hours ago, I was in a full committee hearing with Johnson & Johnson, looking at how they let two different products on the market that had, one of which had potential serious health consequences for consumers. And that they sent in, for one of these drugs, they sent in phantom purchasers to get the product back. There was an active concealment going on. The thing that strikes me about what you just said, about if your customers aren't successful, you're not successful. You said that earlier in your testimony. I actually wrote it down here. If farmers don't succeed, Monsanto does not succeed. It is eerily similar almost to the words, except changing Johnson & Johnson for Monsanto, to the testimony of the CEO of Johnson & Johnson. And here's why I'm calling it to your attention. I don't question your background. You have a tremendous background, and you know, you're certainly qualified to testify before the subcommittee. There's no question about that. And you know, you represent Monsanto well. The question I have is, the aspirational expressions that you make on behalf of Monsanto do not square with the experiential elements of the use of this crop, and that's kind of where we're going with this. Not condemning you. I just want to say that there's some difficulty in squaring this now. Mr. Freeze, is it true that Roundup-resistant weeds was a development that took everyone, including Monsanto, by surprise, or was it a foreseen danger?
I think it was mixed. I know there were some weed scientists who thought that perhaps there wouldn't be resistance evolving, but there were certainly plenty of others who did. Did some people foresee it? So you're saying some people foresaw it and others who they were surprised? Yes, and in fact, it's... What about you? I wasn't following the issue at that time, I have to say. That was before my time. But you have a 1980 report, isn't that right? A 1990 report, yeah, by some colleagues in the public interest community called Biotechnology's Bitter Harvest, and it's a very, very searching and comprehensive report on what at that time was still an experimental technology, 1990. This was 6 years before the introduction of the first Roundup-Ready crop. And in this report, the scientists clearly see the huge potential for development of herbicide-resistant weeds, and particularly with this technology. There was a 1996 report by Consumers Union, another consumer group, in which... So you're saying that scientists did see the potential for herbicide-resistant weed. Which scientists are you talking about? This report was written by Rebecca Goldberg, Dr. Rebecca Goldberg with the Environmental Defense Fund, and Jane Rissler, who's now with Union of Concerned Scientists, and Hope Shand, and Chuck Hasselbrook, who's with the Center for Rural Affairs. 1990. Okay. Now, Mr. Miller, you've been with Monsanto since '94, right?
That is correct.
Okay, and you said in your testimony, I actually took notes when you were testifying. You said in your testimony that Monsanto has 500 scientists who work for the company. Did you say that?
Actually, sir, what my statement was, in my regulatory group, there's 500 scientists. There's over a couple of thousand scientists in our company.
That's even more impressive. A couple of thousand scientists. Do you have any knowledge within the sphere of your activities in a regulatory group where of any reports that were brought to you expressing concerns about herbicide resistance to about herbicide-resistant crops?
I was not in that responsibility at that time, but I can say that...
when did you come into that responsibility?
Just in the last 6 months, sir. But I've been in the company 16 years as a researcher, and I can share with you that I think it's even documented in literature that with the Roundup or glyphosate tolerance, we stated that there was a possibility. We just said it was a low probability. And I would say anytime we develop any of our products, as I mentioned earlier, including with Mr. Smith here, is before we develop them, we actually create forums to understand the data that's out there and the concerns that exist, and take that in consideration as we develop our safe products.
Well, what I would like to do, and I just want to direct subcommittee staff here, to work with Mr. Miller in gaining access to the studies that were done by the scientists at Monsanto with respect to herbicide-resistant weeds, because what we can do here is to be able to identify the progress that has been made through this scientific research with the 500 scientists who are working for you, and perhaps thousands of scientists who are working with Monsanto. So we're going to have, we'll produce from this hearing a follow-up request for documents so that we can enable a better understanding of Monsanto's awareness of this, and I would appreciate your cooperation.
Chairman, we'll be happy to work with you on that request.
Appreciate that very much,
Mr.
Miller.
Chairman, can you yield just about 2 minutes to me? I have another subcommittee.
I would be pleased to yield to the gentlelady at this moment, and I was going to yield 10 minutes to you, and if you need 10 minutes, you can have it now.
Well, thank you. I won't use all that time, but I'm very interested in this subject matter because just recently they're announcing that there's a new salmon that is going to be on the market that has been, shall I say, well, biologically fed to grow larger. And you might recall some of the advertisement in the last few days. And we're questioning whether that will have an impact on humans once they consume that. And so I was listening very closely to see if Monsanto or other companies like you test the environmental impact of these new, what you're working with is an herbicide. But do you test first to see what the impact will be on the environment, or does it grow? The chair is asking for you to kind of document what was done prior to putting it out on the market. And I'm wondering, how far do you go putting these products out there before you test their effect on the environment?
Would you like me to answer that?
Yes, please.
Okay. You know, I'm very proud of the process that we use both to validate the value that we bring to growers as well as the safety of our products. As you know, the products that we put out on the market, if it's a chemistry, it's EPA, biotech, it could be EPA, USDA, FDA, all of those go through thorough health and safety assessments, both internally in our organization as well as with those agencies. And often we also have other third parties that look into that, because at the end of the day, we want to ensure the health and safety, and we believe that system has worked extremely well.
What do you feel you have to do now in light of this, the findings that this superweed is so strong that it doesn't react to whatever you have out there to try to kill it? And it's going to have an impact, and it's going to have a financial impact, certainly on the farmers and all. And so what do you see needs to be done? What is it that we're missing? And we're an oversight, a subcommittee of oversight. What is it that we can do within this process to guarantee that people won't be harmed, crops won't be harmed, and whatever the product is? I mean, what needs to be done? What are we missing?
Chairman Watson, I'm not sure I can address the question of what you're missing, but what I can do is share with you what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is being taken very seriously by Monsanto as well as other technology providers in the industry. I think it's being taken extremely seriously by weed scientists. And also, I think, as was mentioned by Jay earlier, you know, our growers take this very seriously, even before they have weed resistance issues. So what we're doing about it is we've invested well over $30 million in just the last 5 years.
With the gentleman suspend, I just want to, Ms. Wright, I just want to put it on the record that Ms. Wright did stay for most of his testimony, because it doesn't always happen. And I want to thank you for your presence here and for listening to the witness's testimony and some of the questions. Thank you very much. I just want to put that on the record. If you're ready to continue, you may. Thank you.
Yes, so, and we're putting significant research along with working with those local academics to help come up with the best recommendation for farmers. One of the things that I want to bring out is two things. There are glyphosate-resistant weeds, but there are still greater than 290 weeds that do not have resistance, so this is still a hugely valuable tool to growers, and they acknowledge that every time I go out and visit with them. I'm not going to diminish the fact that if one of the weeds are resistant to glyphosate, that there needs to be a control option provided for that grower, and we actually have spent a lot of time, even with the ad that was shown earlier, working on that particular species of weed, and there are control options available in the market, and we're helping growers be trained on how to use that in their agricultural systems.
I am really concerned about the consumer side of all these new products that are out there. And so we're going back, and the chair is asking that we have some documentation so that we can guarantee that we who have the oversight have done all we can to ensure that these products will not have a negative effect on whatever it is and on consumers. And so we're just probing right now to see what our responsibilities are. And if you are looking at evaluating the environmental impacts of your product, well, I want to say thank you so much. That's what I'd like to know. And I'm sure the chair has asked for that information. And with that, I'll wait to see it. And as we probe in this area, Mr. Chairman, I want to be a partner with you. I'm really concerned about that new, does anybody remember seeing the information on television? If so, put your hand up. I want to know about this salmon that is going to be 3 or 4 times the size of any normally grown salmon. If we're to consume it, what is the impact going to be on our digestive systems with this larger salmon? So in all good faith, we're just asking to let us know what we need to look at so that we can protect consumers. Thank you so very much.
I thank the
Mr.
gentlelady
Chairman.
for a question. The subcommittee is also looking at the issues with respect to genetically engineered salmon.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the
And
time.
I want to say, when the gentlelady asked the question, what are we missing, she was actually inviting Mr. Miller to help us in our probe here. But I will say this, that that we look forward to cooperating with you. That cooperation produces information that brings us to a level of comfort that the public interest is being protected, and in pursuit of the public interest, we try not to miss too much. Mr. Miller, you've heard testimony today about concerns that your dicamba Roundup tolerant soybean will cause collateral injury to fruit and vegetable farmers, and I would add even backyard gardeners. I mean, that was essentially what Mr. Smith was testifying to. Your testimony, in fact, acknowledges concerns. Now, in the event that an injury should materialize, apropos of a question Mr. Smith raised, who would be liable for the economic costs of the affected farmers? Will it be Monsanto or another party?
Chairman, I'm not an attorney. I don't believe that
I'm
I
not
can
either. I
answer-
just play one on TV.
I don't believe I can answer that, but we'd be happy to follow up with you later at an appropriate
As you
time
can
to get you that
understand, as you can well
information.
understand, Mr. Miller, I'll accept that you're not an attorney and that you don't want to answer a question that gets you, excuse the expression, into the weeds about the legal implications of this policy. But I would say that we would seek to entertain that discussion with Monsanto attorneys, because this is one of the questions that's being raised here. You have a product, if it has some adverse effect on certain people, there's some questions of liability. I'm not asking you to accept liability here. I know what your limitations are as a witness at this moment. You made that clear. But let me ask you this. Do you think it's correct to classify the injury fruit and vegetable farmers fear from use of dicamba soybean system as an indirect cost of the development of Roundup resistance in weeds?
Chairman, I'm not sure I follow your question. I would appreciate if you could restate it.
Well, you've got Roundup resistance in weeds showing up. Farmers are concerned, and some farmers have expressed that there has been an injury to their fruit and vegetable. Now, you have sold this dicamba soybean system. If the farmers are experiencing this loss, isn't that loss essentially an offloading of expense and indirect cost of the development of Roundup resistance in weeds?
We're 5 years away from introducing dicamba Roundup Ready soybeans into the market. So as we bring these forward, it takes us well over a decade from the time we begin to develop these products till we launch it. 5 years before the launch, we actually set up a dicamba grower or a dicamba advisory council, including many of the producers in the fruit, vineyard, tomato industry. And by the way, as Monsanto, we're one of the largest vegetable seed producers in the world. Tomato customers in that business are some of our biggest customers, and I mentioned early, we care about our customers' success. So our focus is to continue to bring weed-free cropping systems to our producers in corn, soybean, and cotton, as well as serve the interest of those fruit and vegetable producers. And we've got a significant amount of research going on with their input to ensure that when that product comes in the market, that it's successfully implemented.
Do you have legal counsel here with you?
Yes, sir, I do.
Would counsel identify itself?
John Sobko.
Okay. Okay. Actually, I know you gave an answer. You didn't answer the question, but if I press you to answer the question, I know counsel would advise you not to. So we'll move on. Mr. Freeze, do you care to answer that question? The question that I asked about, do you think it's correct to classify the injury fruit and vegetable farmers fear from the use of dicamba soybean system as an indirect cost of the development of Roundup resistance in weeds?
I think that's actually a very good way to describe it. The way the Roundup Ready crop system is used and meant to be used, it has, I would say, inevitably led to some pretty massive weed resistance. And unfortunately, the way we approach weeds in this country is so completely focused on using pesticides that a new herbicide-resistant crop, resistant to different herbicides, seems to be the only thing that a lot of our companies and even the USDA take seriously, when in fact there are many very viable non-chemical ways to control weeds. And
well, now I'm going to go to Mr. Smith, back to Mr. Smith here, because you're in touch with a base of people about these products. You've testified, and I'm quoting from your testimony, the widespread use of dicamba is incompatible with Midwestern agriculture.
Yes, sir.
And, I'm from Ohio. I hear that, and I went, well, I need to hear more. Now, how significant is the risk of injury to fruit and vegetable farmers and processors from planting the dicamba soybean in Indiana farm fields? And do you have any estimate of the potential cost?
We're working on providing an estimate of that through a study with Purdue University at this time.
Would you produce that for the subcommittee when that's done?
Yes, I'd be glad to.
You've testified that the, quote, increased dicamba usage made possible through the introduction of dicamba-tolerant soybeans is poor public policy and shouldn't be allowed. That's a direct quote. Is there a technological fix to the collateral harm you foresee occurring, such as having Monsanto develop dicamba-resistant fruit trees, melons, peas, and tomatoes? Is that the path we should take?
From a consumer standpoint, that's a path that we cannot take.
Why?
There is consumer resistance to the consumption of genetic modified crops. I'm not the expert to understand that.
Sorry, you don't have to answer. Okay, your testimony explains that the dicamba Roundup soybean is designed, Mr. Miller, your testimony explains that the dicamba Roundup soybean is designed to, quote, give growers more weed control options, unquote. It sounds somewhat artful. It sounds an artful way of saying that farmers can't rely on Roundup to control weeds anymore, so they now need to use another pesticide. Is it your belief, Mr. Miller, that the best solution to Roundup resistance in weeds is the farmer use of another pesticide?
I would say my belief, a broad array of university scientists, other industry scientists, the Weed Science Society of America believes that adding multiple modes of action into an agricultural production system is good agricultural practices, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Freeze, is the only or best way to control weeds after Roundup resistance has set in more and more chemicals and new chemical tolerant crops?
I think that's actually a very dangerous path to take, given
Why?
We're learning lots of new things about weed resistance, and new mechanisms are being discovered all the time.
Why is it dangerous?
Pardon?
You use the word dangerous. What do you mean?
I think it's dangerous because it's going to lead to greater resistance down the line.
How do you know that?
Because what we've seen is an increase in multiple herbicide-resistant weeds already. All right. So, for instance, with
So you use more chemicals. You're saying you're going to because some of we had testimony earlier from Ann Wright about the evolution of crops that contains herbicide resistance generally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so for instance, in the 80s and 90s, the popular class of herbicides was called ALS inhibitors, and they generated a massive amount of
for
acetolactate synthase
Okay,
inhibitors.
go ahead.
And they generated a huge expanse of herbicide-resistant weeds. And those resistant weeds were one reason farmers adopted Roundup-ready crops. And now we're getting weed populations that are resistant to both herbicides. In Missouri and Illinois, we have weed populations resistant to 3 and 4 different herbicides. It's
So for those who are not initiated, what are the implications of that? Draw out for us the practical implications if this scenario that you envision happening as a result of your